first principles, you have to resistance train.
Yes.
You have to create a need for muscle mass, and resistance training will do that.
Right. Give your body a reason to hang on to it.
Absolutely, under all costs. Yep.
Yeah. And I
Yep.
think understanding that with the underlying, so if the topic of this episode is about weight loss and fat loss, we're going to talk about right now that you shouldn't be reconsider weight loss at all, just because you can so another thing to understand is you can stay the same weight and completely change the composition of your body to a degree.
Welcome to Reconsider. I'm Bill Hartman. This is the podcast to challenge you to ask better questions, to look beyond traditional models of thinking and arrive at better health and fitness solutions. Reconsider is sponsored by Substance Nutrition. Go to substancenutrition.com to get your Neuro Coffee, better brain, and Synthesis, better protein, better body. Enter the coupon code RECON, RECON, and get free shipping on all of your orders.
We talked about what getting in shape means.
Yep.
And now I think it would be good to specify a little bit because of a lot of people's goals are going to be aligned with weight loss and fat loss and what they think is muscle gain, fat loss, body
So there,
composition.
I think that's part of the issue, right?
Sure.
So we probably need to distinguish, like, first step is let's discuss the difference between weight loss and fat loss.
Definitely. That'd definitely be something we need to talk about.
Yeah, because for the general population, it's always been a weight issue, which is not a terrible, point of reference, but I don't think that's what people mean.
Yeah.
It's like how many people are saying, yeah, I got way too much muscle, I'm going to try to get rid of some. I don't think that happens too often.
Right.
Right.
Yeah. Those are the outliers.
Yeah, but muscle tissue is useful.
Yeah. To an extent, and then it becomes.
Thank you very much. An excellent point. To an extent, it's probably very, very useful. And
Once
then
you
it
get
becomes
once you look like Jay Cutler or Ronnie Coleman, you're starting to choke yourself from the outside.
Yeah, buddy.
most likely.
Hey, baby.
Most likely. Well, think of the demands. To the extreme. It's this some of the same physical battles as obesity.
Sure.
Right, because of the extreme amount of mass that you have to carry around, and that is, it takes great effort to do so. It creates a great deal of potential limitations in movement, which causes secondary consequences that may not be desired in the circumstance. Yeah, most people aren't going to pursue that because it takes a ridiculous amount of time and a ridiculous amount of effort to do so.
Yeah, and I think
but it's worth discussing
right. And I think also, in terms of mental models to discuss, talking about second and third order consequences of things, talking about what causality and causation actually is, and using the example, I wanted to sort of introduce the idea and the example of the ladder of causation, which is something I got from Judea Pearl's book. I think it's called The Book of Why or something like that.
Uh-huh.
And they're just being, I'll post an image of what that ladder is, but the basics of it are: you observe something, you act on something, and then you use your imagination to figure out why it happened. And that last part is something that I believe a lot of people miss, because they don't think about what the other circumstances that might have been there that actually allowed that outcome to happen. And they try to have these sort of direct lines of thinking where it's, I took this supplement or I did this diet and I got this result. And the reality of it is probably not that, and you need to use your imagination to think about. I believe he calls them counterfactuals, where they're outside influences and other things that might not be normally taken into consideration.
Right, and this is why you need to continually expand your perspective, because what happens is that you do become limited in perspective, and then you make an inappropriate association into causation.
Sure. Yeah, that was one thing I wanted to talk about, and then a couple of other mental models that are just present because I've been reading up about them, just because we're doing a podcast talking about a lot of them.
Uh-huh.
The idea of having outcomes be more important than ego. So when it comes to when you have a plan or you invest in doing something, you don't have to stick with that thing if it's not working.
Correct.
And a lot of people, it seems painfully obvious when you say it out loud, but a lot of
Right.
people don't do that because they hang their hat so adamantly on certain things, and they want the validation, and they want to say that what they decided to do is what fixed this.
Right. Well, everybody wants what they like to do to be the solution, and then what they are doing to be the solution, even if it's something they don't like to do, but because it's a decision that they made. Nobody wants to be wrong,
Yeah.
right? And that
And
that
that, yeah,
that
that's
becomes
what I'm,
interference. But this is why you fall back on things like processes and lead measures versus the lag measures.
yeah, yeah,
The
yeah. Can you talk a little bit
lead
about
measures
that?
become more important because those are the things that lead to the outcome.
Sure.
And then it just becomes one big giant algorithm.
Yeah. Let's
It's like,
let do you want to give a more like anecdotal example of leading versus lagging for people to
so
kind of understand?
okay, so the behaviors of eating throughout the day, like eating a certain way. Okay, so you're checking a box. You're saying, I did this, I did this, I did this, I did this. So these are the behaviors that lead to a specific outcome. So making sure that those processes are addressed and intact, those are your lead measures. So it's all about the behaviors that you're investing in a process. The lag measure is what the result would be. So if I am on a fat loss plan of some sort. So the simple lag measure is hopping on the scale and seeing, well, what happened based on the behaviors that I invested in yesterday. And
Sure.
so, but the important thing are the lead measures, because you can do nothing, absolutely nothing about the lag measure once you're taking that measurement. It is what it is. And then that's what helps you decide, okay, what are the lead measures that I need to address? And so it's much more important to be checking those boxes off, right? And then getting and establishing the behaviors, following the process, more than getting excited about the scale. The scale is a byproduct of what you do. And
Okay.
so
Yeah,
that's the
that's a
distinct characteristic.
that's a good example from in the fat loss. I think the example I tend to use in terms of exercise are the leading indicators being your technique and how. First, let's take running or sprinting for instance. If I'm coaching someone in that, the
Uh-huh.
leading indicators are going to be their positions that they can attain and the shapes that they can attain to put force into the ground, and
Right.
the lagging indicators are where we never want to go, and that would be like pain or some type of discomfort that's caused by the leading, like a leading issue.
Right.
So leading are the things that help you sort of use probabilities to predict what will happen in the future.
Correct.
Lagging indicators are too late in most instances to even
Well,
use
because
them.
they're after the lag is always after the fact.
Yeah.
It's always after the fact, right?
Okay.
We're trying to impact the lag measures, but we can't do anything directly about them. It's like I
Yeah.
can't, like maybe you can stand on the scale kind of funny and manipulate the number, right? But that's not helpful,
Right.
right? So it becomes the behavioral element. And so this, like in your case, you brought up a reference to movement. I'm bringing up a reference to eating behaviors associated with fat.
Yeah, but the two things can be very coherent.
Of course,
But they are very coherent.
yeah.
Hopefully, as people listen to us talk and ramble on about this stuff, they'll sort of understand that it's all hashtag. It's all the same. Who's that? Is that Austin? That
Austin, yeah, Austin
uh,
called it Hartman's razor. It's always
Hartman's razor.
everything's the same. Everything's the
Yeah,
same.
I would say everything is everything else.
Yes.
It's all the same stuff. And another thing before we get into the podcast, I'm gonna attempt to not say the word like as much.
Okay. Oh, did
The
you watch
pain,
back and
the
you didn't like
pain
it?
of the pain of editing and producing a podcast. You
Oh,
get to
yes.
see yourself, and I say like too often.
Huh?
But
And you
in
know who I
my
like,
in my defense, I believe I say it far less than most do in the podcast world, just based on my listening to other podcasts. Anyways, I digress. The other thing I wanted to mention, because I have things written out in the base camp, if you wanted to look at that, or you just let me do that and you can just wing it.
I just sit here and wing it, dude.
So you kind of touched on it, but processes and having systems. So the idea I would like people to understand that the idea of having goals can be useful, but it kind of sucks because goals become this thing that you try to attain, and then what's the process once you get to there? So the thing to think about, and this model that I'm thinking about, is systems over goals. So creating a system for success and progress that's steady and continuous and keeps you on a certain vector and trajectory, instead of trying to have a goal that's a set moment in time and is an instant that once you attain it is gone.
Right.
And it doesn't, it's hard to motivate unless you're always setting goals. And then it almost becomes this, it's interference.
Well, it's outside of the moment.
Yes.
Which makes it more difficult. So let's just say I have a 20-pound fat loss goal.
Mm-hmm.
There's nothing I can do about it right now.
Yeah.
Absolutely nothing. But what I can impact now is the behavior that will eventually lead to that outcome. And so that's where my focus needs to be. Because people are trying to project too far in the future and they see it's so far off. It's so frustrating. And then now you've exhausted energy in that direction that you could have used to just say, here's what I need to do today.
Right.
You focus on the moment. It's like, what do I need to do today? What decision makes the most logical sense for me to move in that direction? So that's just a direction. It's just a direction to move towards. You have no idea where you're going to end up, but focus on the moment, focus on the process.
Yeah, and that sort of prioritization and that model of what's the one thing that I can do. What's another way to think about it, lowest hanging fruit. What's the one thing I can do right now in this present moment that I know will help move the dial? Or what question can I ask today that will help me?
Yeah. What book is that? The One Thing?
I think it's called that. Yeah.
That's a great book for this concept because
so we've talked about 2 books already.
Because it's always the question mark. It's like, what is the one thing that will have the greatest impact on me moving in that general direction? That's what I do now. That's what you should do now.
Yeah, and I'm going to do a better job of posting links in the show notes to things that we talk about. But
I believe the title is The One Thing, and I wish I could give the author's name right off the top of my head, but I can't do that.
We'll talk about it enough so eventually you will.
Okay, fair enough.
And then what was the other thing before we get into the format, the typical format? Oh, so hopefully we had some useful things for people to use, useful things to use. We had some models that people that find useful right away that we're talking about this, because obviously if you didn't realize yet, Bill, we're in the podcast. Not as much of a lead in this time. I'm gonna have to cut.
You threw me off.
I'm gonna have to cut a cold open from later on in the podcast.
You threw me off when you said follow the typical format. I didn't know we had a format.
Oh yeah, well that's for me. Whenever I say things that are like format and I'm talking about, it's to keep myself on track. I know that I can only do so much to try to keep you on track. Do you like the?
I haven't used a formal outline. I haven't used a formal outline in 6 or 7 years, so you know.
I'm trying to color coordinate things.
Yes.
Be like professional. I have the Knight Rider kit red light.
Oh, is that what that is back there? I thought it was a lightsaber. Okay.
Yeah, well, it kind of looks like it's some like quarter light thing. So, anyways, let's get into so we'll go through again the way that we've been trying to format this. I'll remind you every time we do a podcast of what the format is.
I appreciate that.
We'll talk a little bit about the history of the topic. So we'll talk about fat loss and weight loss and diet, and we'll talk about what the current thought process that we hear typically is and what we see, and then we'll offer, although we already did this on the front end, which I kind of like, we offer a different perspective right away. We'll talk about where it comes from, what people think about it right now, and then we'll offer that varied perspective again, maybe add a few things in, maybe reiterate a couple of things. Okay. So me looking into, and at any point if you have stuff that you remember from the
Mhm.
history of this type of thing,
Yeah,
feel free to add it
I'll
in.
just jump
But
in.
yeah, so going all the way back to, we've already talked about Greek, Roman, physical culture type of stuff. It wasn't really, it was kind of looked down upon at being overweight because you were not contributing to a physical culture, obviously, and
Right,
you were rich enough. So morally, it was this weird obligation. All these people that weren't eating were thin, and you were fat. And throughout time, that moral implication has been existing.
right,
And then it's starting to get around, religious reasons for people not eating, anorexia being the sort of moral level of virtue that you can attain by not eating, and still the same type of indulgence being bad and a sin. Then in the 1800s, it becoming more popular for dietary health influences. So you have Kellogg and you have the graham cracker and all these sort of crazy nutritional influences where people were doing things to try to fight disease. A lot of it wasn't too far off, but some of it was just completely wild.
right,
And then the biggest change towards fitness and fat loss and weight loss I could find was around like the 30s, where it was really looked down upon to be fat because no one had anything. We were in a depression era,
right,
and the look that everyone wanted to try to get towards, because they were getting away from like wanting to constrict their bodies with corsets and stuff like that, was just being thin and having low weight. So you have people like Jack
Score begin.
LaLanne, who started
One,
gyms and fitness
two,
right,
centers in the late 30s.
right.
I think that eventually turned into Bally, Total Fitness, I think,
Let's
if
see,
I
the
could be wrong.
Tannies are. Did Vic Tanny? Vic Tanny was similar. Maybe he was later. He might have been later.
Yeah. So it was that. I didn't look
Similar
too much
concept.
into that. This is all coming from like a couple of the different articles. And
Yeah.
then there being Charles Atlas in the later 30s becoming the guy
Dynamic
who,
tension.
yeah,
First article I ever wrote for Men's Fitness was about mentioned
was about
Charles Atlas.
Atlas. Yeah, and that was
Yeah,
the
it was
whole
about it
like
was about
trying to be fit and get bigger and weight
right,
loss and not be bullied and that sort of thing. Um, and then from there, it's just turned into a money grab where different industries are trying to play on people's emotions and about weight loss and fat loss and looking a certain way,
right,
and
right.
it's billions and billions of dollars at this point. I forgot what the exact number was, but
Without
it might be like
question.
60 billion dollar industry or something, just
Yes, I
just in
believe
that.
Suzanne Summers. I believe Suzanne Summers made more money from the Thigh Master than she
Found
did as an
Master.
actress.
Every
I
single
believe it.
time you
It
squeeze
was such
Thigh
a huge.
Master, you
I can remember infomercials and stuff like that, just
Yeah,
talking so much about,
yeah,
and that obviously we've talked a bit earlier, the influence of people trying to make money versus actually helping. It doesn't really matter to them if you're paying, if the return on investment and the key performance indicator for a company is just profit and loss. They don't care if you get a result or even if you hurt yourself. It doesn't matter to them.
that is correct.
Um, Anything
We will
else?
avoid that, by the way. We will avoid
Yeah, that's part of our goal here. It's
Yeah.
just
That's why we
save.
charge so much for this podcast.
Eventually, eventually, you can monetize podcasts, Bill.
I have no idea how to do that. We're just going to
Yeah.
talk.
Well, yeah. Well, for now, we'll just talk. The and now I think that's a pretty good introduction of what I'd say over the past few years. There's been a lot more sciency. I'll say sciency because the research is not great, and if you want to find a result in research, you'll find it.
Yeah,
It's just you can
that is
manipulate whatever you
true.
want.
That is true. You will find support for just about anything that you want to believe.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And if
it's
it, if you're getting a grant and you're being paid to research something specifically, it's probably in your best interest to find the result that you're looking for.
a favorable outcome.
Yeah, especially if a company is paying for it as well, and that company has an interest in you finding a certain result. So that's a whole, we can have a whole different conversation about research and literature. We talked about the brief history. Do you think I left anything out? I mean, I didn't really talk about the recent history as much. I kind of stopped in the
Well,
beginnings of the modern era of it.
I think we can delve into what actually makes a difference.
Yeah, yeah, and I think it'll be useful to continue on. Like, what are the current fallacies and thought processes that people use are things that they're going to hear a lot from outside sources about fat loss. And the things that came to mind that I wrote out were trying to out exercise a bad diet,
Yep.
thinking that there's one specific way in order to lose weight
Correct.
or to lose fat,
Yeah.
thinking that there's only one way that you can train for it and everyone should do that way is kind of a continuation of that. Or the idea that there are better ways to do certain things, definitively better ways to do certain things than others. Other problems that people
There's going to be some essentials.
Sure. Yeah, and we'll get to like
Right.
what the because that'll boil down to another mental model of using first principles.
Right.
What are the things that no matter what question you ask will always be true?
There you go.
And we'll come back to that in a
Okay.
second here. The other things I wanted to include were exercise as a punishment and food as a reward creates a really big behavioral problem for people, and I think it causes a lot of interference. And then eating more frequently because of the appetite changes that can happen with exercise or not happen with exercise, but also because of this idea that that the body is somehow this metabolic furnace and you need to keep feeding the body calories in order to like increase the thermic effect of food and keep the furnace hot.
Yeah, I'm not a big fan of the NEAT versus the thermic effect and all that kind of stuff.
We could talk about that because I have a certain perspective on why non-exercise activity is important that you don't, but we'll talk about that. No, this is good. You and I should disagree sometimes. I just don't want to I don't want it just to be some like echo chamber where I say something and you go yeah, and then you say something and I go yeah.
I would be happy to tell everybody that you're wrong.
Wrong, sir. Wrong.
That's certainly what I would hope that you'd be able to tell me I'm wrong. Okay. I think those are the main things. Can you think of any other things you hear constantly from people that are
nobody talks to me and I don't listen to anyone, so it doesn't matter.
So that's purely my responsibility.
Let's roll.
What
I am out of touch with reality. Like anybody that watches this on the YouTubes, they need to understand that this is the space that I live in, that you're seeing on camera, and I never leave it. So it's like I live in my own little happy world, and I rely on everybody else to tell me stuff that's happening outside of this. So
all right.
All right, so lead on.
I'm here. I like to be. So I'm your connection to reality, which is scary.
Which is scary.
If people knew me, I'm not too far off of what you're describing. So we talked about the history a bit.
Yep.
We talked about what people currently believe, or at least some of the examples of what people currently believe and what sort of interference they cause. Right. And now we're going to offer a different perspective, sort of based on some of the things we talked about earlier, behaviors. Yep. Let's talk about first principles first. What are the necessities for training in this way or trying to get weight loss and fat loss? I
think so again, can we shift this away from the concept of weight loss first, and we'll just talk about like nobody should want to give up muscle that they already have, unless they're at the extreme. Again, we're going to take the extremes out of this. And from a lifetime perspective, what we want to make sure is that we have enough active tissue that allows us to move and be effective. And that's a qualitative element of life. It makes everything better if we can retain or even augment muscle mass to a small degree. Like we don't have to carry on, like we don't want to create more metabolic demand by having this massive amount of muscle, but muscle is important because again, it's the thing that allows you to move. It is useful from a blood sugar management strategy to have a place for that stuff to go, right? And so muscle mass being active will allow us to avoid the deposition of calories as fat because we have active muscle tissue. So we always want to do something to maintain that. So when we talk about a first principle of fat loss, we need some way to maintain, or like I said, slightly augment the amount of muscle mass that we do have. That is an essential element of it, because you can lose weight and you'll lose fat. You can lose weight though without any exercise whatsoever.
Yeah. So that becomes the danger of, so we're going to talk about the math of it and the calories in versus calories out sort of equation. But what you're saying is an important precursor to that and is a good first principle to understand that we want to hang on to muscle. So
Absolutely, at all
it
costs,
needs,
at all costs.
and you'll have a specific, the specific specificity of using muscle will
Right.
allow for the nutrition that you put into your body to actually be utilized at that area.
Right. Versus emphasis on storage. We want
Yeah.
utilization, not so much storage. In fact, as we're dealing with this issue, until you get to some stabilized body composition that is desirable, that will be the area of emphasis.
Yeah. And
So
that's okay.
resistance training. So first principles, you have to resistance train.
Yes.
You have to create a need for muscle mass, and resistance training will do that.
Right. Give your body a reason to hang on to it.
Absolutely, under all costs. Yep.
Yeah. And I
Yep.
think understanding that with the underlying, so if the topic of this episode is about weight loss and fat loss, we're going to talk about right now that you shouldn't be reconsider weight loss at all just because you can so another thing to understand is you can stay the same weight and completely change the composition of your body to a degree. And the way you're going to know that is going to be usually based on how your clothes fit in a practical sense, because getting a body fat measurement is not very practical, nor are most of the ways to measure it even
It's not
valid.
terribly useful.
Yeah, and it's also not very useful.
Yeah.
But how your clothes fit is a great way.
So here you go. So let's go back to lag measures for a second. Do two things. Weigh yourself in the morning and take a waist measurement at your belly button level. Exhaled. So an exhaled waist measurement at your belly button level. Every day. Every day. Just make it a habit.
And what Bill just did there is what we like to call a callback. So these are the moments in the podcast that make people really, really resonate with people.
Oh, really?
Because hey, didn't we just talk about that?
Yeah.
Well, that's why stand-up comedy works too. It's the relevance and the observational.
Nothing better than a callback to wrap up your set.
Yeah. Well, you have to plug the joke from the beginning, and then almost every conclusion of a stand-up set is going to include a callback.
And there you go.
Because that's how you do it, man. Comes
we
full
are,
circle.
Dude, we are full service here. So all the stand-up comedians now have an act.
Yeah, it's an algorithm, just like anything is. That's why
we need to lead into the concept of an algorithm.
Sure. I mean, I think we should. Let me look at my list here to make sure we're. Yeah. So thinking algorithmically, how can that apply to the initially misguided idea of weight loss? Right. So let's think about it. Now we're shifting the focus from what we even came to this episode for, which is reconsidering what weight loss and fat loss is, and let's think about it from more if we're trying to recomposition or change the composition of our bodies to be healthier. What's the algorithm there, or the algorithmic thinking there?
Well, so we have our behaviors, right? So we have our lead measures. So we have to check our boxes every day, and then we check our lag measures, and then we have a certain amount of time that we will maintain those lead measures, regardless of the lag measures. We will maintain that for a certain amount of time, because attempting to change things on the fly on a continuous basis is an exercise in futility, right? So what we need is an amount of time that allows a favorable or unfavorable change to occur, but the unfavorable wouldn't be too far out of reach for us to make the favorable changes in our lead measures to, again, move towards the favorable lag measures, right? And then not too long a period of time that, again, if we go too far in the wrong direction, so again, let's just say that weight loss accelerated to a ridiculous degree, right? We might be giving up something that we need to maintain, such as muscle mass.
Sure, and that's something that gets, so the problem with losing weight for the sake of losing weight is a lot of times people go through this roller coaster cycle of losing a bunch of weight and then regaining it every holiday. But the body isn't very kind when it comes to how it gains weight and loses weight. So you're going to lose muscle and fat at the same degree unless you're using the muscle like Bill was talking about. But when you gain weight, you are going to gain fat predominantly if there is no activity to make your body want to gain muscle or maintain it. So
Yeah,
it's a
and then
really vicious, it can be a really vicious cycle. And then
and
as
there you
people
go.
leave, I think the statistics are like after you leave college, you gain like 10 pounds a year or something
Yeah,
like that.
it sneaks up
The
on you
normal
apparently.
person.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but see, and people say, well, you shouldn't weigh yourself every day. Why not?
Yeah. Why not?
Why
It's just
not?
information.
Right, right. But again, what we're trying to do is establish a series of behaviors, right? And so again, it's like I do this every day. I go through a process.
Yeah.
Every day starts to look the same for a reason.
So there's our callback to systems over goals. Because otherwise you're just blindly trying to reach this point and then you reach another point and then you reach another point and you're just kind of like
Right.
you're you're peeing in the wind,
Oh,
as they would say.
well played.
That,
Um,
that was my PG version of what I wanted to say.
okay, so what's our time frame?
For weight loss?
Yeah. Well, let's talk fat loss. Wait, we're talking fat loss.
Yeah, fat loss. Okay,
So,
so say
so,
like
so we
if
don't
I
want to get
have
out of control. We don't want to go too far in one direction, right?
yeah
And we want to make sure that our outcome remains favorable, which will allow us to make regular decisions on making small,
right.
measurable adjustments.
I
Okay.
think Bill is about to give us a practical example of how to lose weight within a given time frame. Or sorry, I should say we lose fat. I did it again.
Oh, got it. Yeah.
Let's say New Year's resolution. I would like to lose a certain amount of fat. Let's say I would like to lose 10 pounds of fat in the first quarter of 2023.
Oh, that's a piece of cake. Cool.
Yeah.
Every couple weeks. It's a pretty good standard measure. You can do it a little bit more frequently and you could go a little bit longer, but and the reason I say this, Chris, is my whole world revolves around the 2 week concept.
Yeah, so a model of like the sprints.
Yeah, so I sprint I do what's called a sprint every 2 weeks, where every 2 weeks looks the same. It just repeats over and over and over again. And
Sort
so
of
again,
building intensity and then backing off. And then
right.
building
So
intensity.
you if you make a favorable change, you will recognize it within that time frame. If you make an unfavorable change, you haven't done so much damage that you can't recover from it very quickly. Right. So if you waited 6 weeks, let's just say you waited 6 weeks, and the plan that you had executed did not go well. You might be so far, away from your intended outcome that now frustration increases, emotions rise, and then you say, screw it. And you're, sitting there eating a half a gallon of ice cream by yourself watching Netflix,
Yeah.
Which never a bad thing.
Can have its uses.
Unless you're trying to, yeah, unless you're trying to lose fat. No, it just gives you a nice little measure, like reasonable measure that gives you some element of control over the situation to make good adjustments and decisions.
Right.
And
Okay.
it also
So
gives you enough time to make the favorable change.
as we reframe this and we kind of reconsider this, we've talked about just as a necessity with the fat loss, any type of fat loss training is going to need a level of resistance training as support underneath. This
Right.
has to be there because otherwise, as we lose the weight, we're going to lose both fat and muscle together. And the less muscle we have, actually, the harder it will be to come back if I have to come back to this fat loss journey again. But having that mental mindset, we also need to get rid of as well to have it not be goal oriented and trying to hit a number, but have it involve making a system for yourself and an algorithm for yourself that allows you to have continued progress and consistency for the rest of your life.
Right.
That's going to be a big factor there. Understanding that there is some level of math to it and calories in versus calories out. So you would like to, utilize more than you are taking in.
Right.
Body
How about we turn
goals.
something that's unpleasant into something that is useful?
Sure. What do you mean?
You're going to be hungry.
Yeah. There's discomfort is going to be a marker of progress when it comes
Right.
to stuff like
Like,
this.
but you can, and this is, speaking a little bit from experience here, it's like, this is like, when you feel hungry, it's not a sign that you're doing something wrong. It's actually favorable. And that doesn't mean you're starving yourself to death, but
Yeah.
like especially at nighttime, when that's when people are weakest, because your energy levels are at their lowest. It's where you're going to make the worst decisions, and it's also where you're going to be the most hungry. So being hungry and recognizing that fact means that you're making a favorable change. If we can change that perspective,
Right.
we'll use the word reconsider what your
Yeah.
interpretation is of being hungry. It's like you're
Okay.
supposed to be, because you're creating a deficit.
Yeah, and that's
Deficit.
that concept is important. There needs to be a caloric deficit that you're in through a combination of exercise and nutritional intake,
Right.
with an underlying goal of always keeping some semblance of resistance training. The activity that you can do could be literally anything outside of that, as long as you're trying to hang on to the muscle and you're using calories. So you obviously want to pick the things that are safer, so that you're not injuring yourself. Because if you injure yourself, you can't do any of this stuff, and
Right.
then you're just that gets in the way of the preliminary and underlying goals. The other things, what else did I want to talk about? Eating less, moving more. That concept can be useful. Exercise. So, exercise is not a great way to lose calories, to get rid of calories,
No, it's
to
not. It's
lose
not as
fat.
much as people think.
Yeah, and so you think about 100% of the calories you take in are from what you eat, but only, even if you train a lot, only about 30% probably of the calories that come out of the system that we're talking about are going to be from exercise. And I don't want to belabor this and get too into non-exercise activity, although we could have a discussion about that. But it's just like you're gonna burn more than you take in, or try to at least. You're gonna keep some muscle and some resistance training in there so that you can support the underlying and important first principles of health, I guess would be a way to think about it. And
So
understand that exercise is not going to be the answer, so you shouldn't try to have a bad relationship with food on top of that.
right, but let's go back to the neat thing for just a second. So here's my argument.
Sure.
Is that, so what it should represent is the fact that you are being an active person, looking
Yes.
at it as the contributor to, is overestimating its value.
Well, yeah, so the systems over goals thing. It's a lifestyle over it's not
Right.
just about
It's
it's not about
anti-sedentary. It is not a massive contribution to fat loss.
Sure, but there is a lot. Okay, so there is a lot to
See yourself as an
walk.
active person.
Yes, it's reconsidering how you see yourself and your self perception, and
Right.
but also I believe there is such a benefit to steps and walking for a myriad of reasons. One of the just from the dynamics of like how we actually lose fat, from a physiological sense at the cells, you carbon dioxide and water, right? So breathing is how you lose fat.
Right.
And if I can drive up respiratory rate through some type of exercise that isn't going to be interfering with my progress, potentially I could have an influence there.
But the way that you're walking around during the day is not doing that.
I'm talking about adding in walks in an exercise context.
Okay. That's different than what I'm saying.
Okay.
I'm talking about the little thingies that people wear that said, "Oh, I took this many steps today." It's like, okay, great.
Right.
At what point in time did that become exercise?
This is the point where Bill is trying to prove me wrong.
Well, I'm not trying to prove anything.
I know. I understand.
Intentional exercise is far superior.
Yeah. Oh, definitely. That was never my argument. The
Accepting a number of steps as I was better today. That's where I don't want people to go. Like, don't pat yourself on the back for your how many thousand steps that you take.
These are like you want to have these be like baseline measures of how many steps you get in a day. That's just a way of like, this is keeping let's say my base metabolic rate is at a certain level when I get a certain amount of steps. That should just be the normal.
Right.
Yeah. And then you build off of that.
Right. We want to do things with great intention, not by accident.
Absolutely.
Because then it becomes a behavior that you're controlling. that's what we want to do.
I'm going to say
I want people to understand that they are making a conscious decision to behave a certain way.
Yeah.
You're more likely to have an outcome with great intentions than you are by accident.